you have 30 years experience in the intellectual property industry in the United Kingdom. How is the current COVID-19 situation affecting the industry in general? Which are the major changes you've seen in the last few months?
Right. Well, I'm actually seeing a very wide spectrum of reactions to this situation. And immediately, of course, a worry in my team was that work might drop off very rapidly. Not because we were in any problem. We're all working from home and we're used to dealing with email and video conferencing anyway, but more how it would affect our clients. And for sure, some of our clients have been very badly affected, have furloughed most of their workforce, and are essentially putting the whole businesses into a mothball situation. But it's not entirely like that. And I've seen other clients who are continuing very much as normal, even in the manufacturing sector where you might think it's difficult, but I've got a number of manufacturing clients who are essentially carrying on like normal. They've managed to introduce social distancing into their factories, keep people apart, particularly if it's a business-to-business manufacturing company. They are still finding that their supply chains are working even on an international basis and continue as normal. And then there are other sectors, of course, who are actually benefiting. I do quite a lot in the computer games and software sectors, and they seem to be doing great business at the moment. Food distribution is another one. Medical supplies is an obvious one where there's a lot of activity. So really, right from businesses closing down to businesses booming, I've seen a very wide spread. And on balance, I'll have to say my workload is probably increased as a result of the situation.
You're now part of the Law Society International Committee.
Yes.
How is the current situation affecting your work in promoting and lobbying for improvements in the intellectual property law at UK level and at international level?
Well, there has been quite a change there, because before the COVID-19 situation, one of the big focuses obviously was Brexit, both for the UK, both how it fits in Europe and also how it affects other territories around the world. And what has been very interesting in a sense is how that whole agenda has just almost vanished. That although it's still there, and for instance the government is still negotiating Brexit in theory, everyone's attention has gone on to COVID-19. And so a good example, for instance, is the Unified Patent Court and how that has been put into a state of flux with the decision in Germany. The German Constitutional Court has rendered the court unconstitutional in Germany, and so Germany in the short term are not going to ratify the agreement setting up the Unified Patent Court. Now in the IP world, that's obviously quite a big deal, but in terms of press coverage, I think compared with normal times, it's been relatively low, and because everyone is just so focused on other issues. So that lobbying is all going on in the background. We've still got lists of things we want to do, but I'll have to say it is all taking second stage to just the simple day-to-day things of making sure everything is functioning normally due to the COVID situation. You mentioned the International Committee at the Law Society, for instance. Our next committee meeting that's coming up is going to be virtual, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm a big fan of people meeting face to face, actually, and I'm based in the north of England, and the committee meetings are always held in London. I could normally join virtually, but I like to travel to London to attend those meetings. Whereas now we're forced into a situation where the only way forward is a virtual meeting.
I realize from your background that a significant amount of your work has an international element. Do you see any stakeholders in the industry having budgetary impacts due to the current situation? And if so, would you say it's more noticeable in some jurisdictions as opposed to others?
Yes, it is interesting. as I mentioned, I think an initial worry was that all work would be put on hold. All intellectual property work would perhaps be perceived by companies as secondary, something they can deal with later, something that's not as important as business continuity. Although I have to say, I'm not really seeing that happening. All the projects I had that were underway at the start of the COVID-19 situation, companies have continued with those. None, not with a single exception, has been put on hold. So that was one worry. The next worry was whether new projects would arise, and this is much harder to gauge. And one thing's for sure is we were involved in a number of pitches to get on panels for companies, and those companies who had put out tenders, those tenders have been put on hold. Understandably, businesses see appointing a new set of legal representatives as less important. But equally, we're seeing a stream of new intellectual property protection initiatives come on stream, people taking steps to stop infringement. And so I'm quite heartened to see that companies are seeing intellectual property not as totally secondary, but as something that perhaps even in these times is more important because it helps you maintain the market share in a fairly difficult economic environment. On an international scale, again, it's very hard to see the differences between jurisdictions and how things are progressing. But one very heartening thing to see is that instructions from China are having a bit of a bounce up at the moment, and all the feedback I'm getting from Chinese intellectual property representatives is things are very much moving back to normal in China, which is great to see, because it's good news for China, but I think it's good news for the rest of us, and that they're pulling out of the situation, hopefully, as the weeks and months go by. So will we.
It might be at the early stages, but do you have a forecast of what the aftermath of the COVID-19 situation will be regarding international collaboration in the intellectual property industry?
Yes, I think we've got to look at positives. One quite interesting thing, just in the last week, I've had a number of sort of social networking video conference calls with lawyers and contacts around the world, people who I deal with normally, but at times what would happen is we'd work together on projects and get our heads down on the projects. And from a social point of view, we would see each other at conferences that were being held around the world. Now, they don't get held that often, so there might be people who I was seeing once a year, maybe. Whereas now, we're getting together every few weeks, and there's much more collaboration there, in a sense. And so my hope is that that's going to continue afterwards. We're going to come out of this, and we'll all perhaps be a bit more used to having video conversations like the one you and I are having now, and we will perhaps be closer. So who knows? It might be stimulating international collaboration and discussion, and these sort of getting together on a social chit-chat sort of level, which stimulates business, could be more common. So that is my sort of note of positivity, I think, about how our business practices are developing.
And is there anything else you would like to add that reflects how the industry hasn't been impacted by the global reality we're currently living in?
There's a sense of positivity in that people are feeling very united in disaster, but in everyone around the world is facing very similar times. Illness, grief, economic uncertainty. But as a result, I think people are feeling at one with each other and trying to help out each other. And perhaps a good example is a Chinese law firm I deal with in Beijing has offered to send to my practice some PPE equipment, some masks that we can distribute among the staff, because masks are perhaps just about to be introduced into the UK for public use. They're not used very often. They're not so easy to get hold of. The Chinese first realised that. They've got plentiful supplies where they are, and they've offered to send it. And it's this solidarity between people and practitioners that I think has been a positive effect in a difficult circumstance.